Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul, and hi to all our listeners. Today is going to be a type of show that we haven't done for quite a while, and that's a solo-sode. I have some ideas on the topic of everyone has a next chapter. Now, our show is called The Next Chapter, and I'm not sure I've ever dealt with the next chapter specifically as we are going to do today. Now, just recently, we did a show with Terry Hershey on the subject of creating inner space for change. The idea was that in order for meaningful change to occur, you must first declutter your mind and your activities. I think that show is number 231. You might want to check it out because it's sort of a precursor to today's show, in which I plan to talk about what life change may look like. What does it have to do with meaning, adventure, and awe? And that's the theme of the next chapter with Charlie. It's all about in search of meaning, adventure, and awe. And like I said, I don't think I've ever done a show on meaning, adventure, and awe. Have I?
I don't think so. Not that clearly.
Yeah, this is not on purpose anyway, huh? Well, today is the day. As an executive life coach, I work with highly successful individuals who are planning for greater meaning in their life, either through their career or by means of retirement. So I live with these ideas. They're part of my nature. And as a lover of life, of a life of meaning, adventure, and awe, my inner core drives me to pursue this process with greater and greater alignment to my true self, which we will talk about, what that means. In our time together today, I plan to talk about three issues: the drivers, the restraints, and the processes for life change. In other words, how can we enter into the next chapter? Because like it or not, check this out, like it or not, every day is a new chapter. And it is up to you to determine the content of that chapter. Yes, you get to determine the content of your life. So, with that, why don't we begin? Let me see if Producer Paul has any questions before I start right into my...
I got my pen ready. I'm going to take some notes here today. You just already got me thinking here. Every day is the next chapter. We tend to think chapters as lots of pages go by and then a new chapter.
Yeah, the future is now.
Yeah. And change is constant.
And it changes constantly. So yeah, let's do it. Let's look at the first thing we want to talk about are what I'm calling the drivers to change. What inspires us to make a change? And I have a handful of things written down here that I'd like to discuss. And I think one of the first, and these are not listed by priority. They're just clumped in a series of ideas. And the first one, I think we all have this sense of incompleteness. I think there's something about us that we're always thinking we need to be more, we need to be different, we need to be better, which I'm not sure I buy all of those, but I do buy that we need to be closer to who we really are. And that sense of incompleteness comes from a need that is resonating more deeply within what I'm calling the true you. It's often expressed today in it's too bad it's an overused concept or an overspoken concept, but I like it, the authentic self. We can get trapped into buying other people's vision for our life. It starts in early adulthood, where our parents have a vision for us, our teachers have a vision for us, our college has a vision for us, everyone else has a vision for us. Because we are so naive at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, we are naive because we're just in the process of becoming adult, just in the process of learning. We're so influenced by influential people in our lives. And as a result, there is a risk of pursuing a career and a life that is not in line with who you are individually, that does not meet with your core desires. And so there is this sense of incompleteness because I've been living someone else's life. I remember hearing an old Woody Allen, and I'm going to mess this up because I just thought about it, but I'm going to try to give it a shot. And he's doing a comedy gig, and he says, here I was, and he was being, as a Jew, which he talks about, he was being threatened by the Ku Klux Klan, and he said he saw his life flash before his eyes. And he was sitting there, he says, I was sitting around a campfire cooking up a mess of fish, fresh fish caught in a lake. And he said, and I quickly realized, fresh fish caught in a lake? I'm New York. This is not me. He says, I'm dying, and I'm recounting someone else's life. That's typical Woody Allen. And that is sort of what we fall prey to, is living someone else's life or someone else's dreams for us. And in that process, another driver to change is there a sense of loss of self-identity. And it happens, I'm thinking of the working individual, and I'm thinking of two scenarios. One scenario is that you are in a job that does not resonate with you. Your talents aren't taken advantage of. You are not utilized to your full giftedness or to your special giftedness, because it's a job, as we had spoken earlier, it's a job that somebody else proposed that you take, and there's a sense of loss. Boy, I'll tell you, the big sense of loss. And for those of you who are entering this stage, be ready for the sense of loss at retirement. I've spoken at length on that, as when I retired, my identity was based on my career and was based on my accomplishments and based on what I did. And as a result, when I retired and my calendar was now open, I had an empty calendar, and what I used to have a very full calendar, it was empty and open, and I felt two curses. One is uselessness, and the other is boredom. And those are times that reinventing my life, entering a new chapter, creating a new chapter is absolutely vital. And my last driver to a sense of life change is that, I don't know for you, but me, my soul demands regular infusions of invigoration. My soul becomes stale unless it's invigorated with something new. I hate to admit it, because I think it's a flaw, but I bore too easily, and I need to be doing something meaningful. And so those are drivers to change: a sense of incompleteness, a sense that I need to do something that's resonating with the true me. I have a loss of self-identity, or my soul is not being inspired. Any questions or ideas on that, Paul?
I think you touched on so much. You could go in so many different areas there. We'll talk about not just inspired, but what we do. Terry said something that stuck with me last episode, and it was one of those things that I keep thinking about it over and over again. How we're all men, we're all Western, and we all got to do stuff, right? And he said, how much stuff do you have to accomplish before you can accept you're okay? It's the idea of having to do. Like you're saying, you've got to go out and see stuff. Is it more than that? Do we got to do stuff?
You know what I would question on that is it's not the amount of stuff we're doing, but it's the right stuff.
Yeah.
It's a cute little phrase. I don't know how true it is, but it's a cute little phrase. It works. It says managers talk about doing things right. Leaders talk about doing the right things. It's very different between doing things right and doing the right things. And I think what Terry could be alluding to is that we're not doing the right things, is that we're busy doing a lot of things, filling our time, filling our tasks. We have our checklist. Terry's very big on talking about checklists and weighing and measuring. And I just heard him lecture last weekend. And he's very cute when he's standing up on stage and he does his check mark. He makes...
Does he make a
list,
sound of the check?
And he does it. And he goes, check, because we're dying to check things off. Well, we check things off, but the one element that is not on the list typically, what was the value? Did it mean anything? I'm thinking of Intel, and I'm thinking of the old CEO of Intel. Everybody in the company at the end of every week, every person in the company was responsible for writing less than a paragraph, and it was on tell us, and the whole company had access to every employee, wow. Every executive, everybody. What value did you add to the company this last week? I don't want to know what you did. I don't care how many meetings you went to, how many projects you accomplished, but what value did he add? And he himself would have to write that out so people would take a look at it. And I think it's just a whole way of looking at our life differently rather than busily looking at it meaningfully, purposefully. And so I think that's kind of what I would get out of it, would be my take on what Terry says.
I used to know somebody, and they used to call it the illusion of activity. If I'm doing lots of things, I must be important. I must be making money. I must be getting things done. And all it is just busy work.
Precisely. I'm working on my computer right now. It's really funny. I have a Band-Aid on one. It takes it 2 fingers to scroll.
Right. I
have a Band-Aid on one finger that just slides and it won't scroll. So I'm having to use my first and third finger rather than my first and second, and I'm completely lost. I'm at a loss because my computer is not my computer management skills are in question here. So those are the things driving us. I was speaking with, gosh, I hate this term. I was speaking with my daughter-in-law this morning, and I just don't like that name, daughter-in-law, Maggie, because it sounds so legal and so formal, and it loses the beauty of relationship that the two of us have, that we are very close, very relational, and daughter-in-law just sounds so formal. But anyway, I wish there was another title. Now that I've gone through all that, I forgot what we were talking about. We were talking about this subject, and she was talking about how she's making some changes in her life and in her career, and as they're pursuing life together in professional sports. And she was talking about mourning some of the losses that she's had to overcome, and then put additions of new things into her life. And I think that has so much to do with inspiring, invigorating. Is there such a word as invigorating? Yes, there is. For sure. And fulfillment. Those are drivers to life change and discovering the next chapter. Let's move on to what are restraints? Okay, I feel this incompleteness. I feel this lack of resonance with my own inner core. I feel something missing. What do I do to make a change? Before I can even get to what are the options, I have restraints that just right away prevent me from even considering them. The first one is fear. Change is fearful. And the first one is the fear of the unknown. And that's kind of obvious, but we do fear the unknown, and this is why you have women primarily that live in abusive situations, because a bad known is better than any unknown. A bad known, I can predict it. I know what's going to happen. An unknown, I have no way of predicting what's going to happen. I have no idea about the future. I can at least manage this, and that is just that's terrifying to think that, and that's where we have to risk change and take chances. And the second fear that comes to my mind is the possibility that things could go wrong. That is a huge possibility in change. Change can be predicted, can be, I think risk-taking can be done wisely and can be done with that you set some protective standards or some protective mechanisms around you that keep you from falling too badly, but there is always that possibility of things that go wrong. We go back to that unknown fear. I'm just going to keep this because I don't want to risk it getting worse. And yet, that means I just continue to accept, I don't want to say necessarily the mundane, but to accept that which is truly unacceptable to your soul.
But you just described where Terry and I grew up. He grew up in Michigan, even more rural Michigan. I grew up in suburban Michigan. But I always felt that was the mantra we were taught. That was the ideal we strove for in my Midwestern youth, which was you gave up the real high moments, also avoid the real low moments. You looked for middle, safe, secure, steady job, solid marriage, solid soil. Everything was more about, and maybe it came from the Depression and before that pioneers and everything who risked everything and who lost so much. Steady was seen as better. The predictable was always seen as better than the unpredictable.
How would you evaluate the satisfaction of people doing that? Were they satisfied with that?
Two ways. I was not. I left because it was bland, it was boring, it was same, it was predictable, it was everything that just felt stifling and gagged me. And they would look at me like, well, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. You're in these dull, kind of safe, middle-of-the-road existence. They didn't find the rut restrictive, they found the rut comforting. It's so hard to believe. I think that you either accept it and you stay and you become like it. Not everybody. I'll give you a quick story. I used to go back every year when my parents were alive. And, of course, you're not from Michigan like I am, and you don't know how much they hate California and hate the crazy and the change. And, oh, my goodness, it's all flakes and fruits and nuts, and even the earth shakes. Nothing solid out there. And so I'd always brace myself for this, onslaught of criticism. I lived in California. A guy came up to me and said, "You're that guy from California, aren't you?" I said, yeah. Tell me how much you hate California. He said, "I don't hate California. I wish I had the nerve to go there." I said, "Really?" I said, "Why? What do you do?" He said, "I work for the railroad, just like my father and my grandfather did." I said, "I didn't do it because I loved it. Did it because that's all I thought I could do, and it was safe." And he said, "I wish I could do something wild once in my life, like going to California." So there are people, I think, that silently suffer from that, but the general feeling is back there, better safe than sorry.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Paul, because it was one of the issues that I was pondering as I was thinking this subject, is when is the status quo simply okay? This is good. I'm happy with this. I'm going to do my 9 to 5 or whatever that is. I'm going to come home and
30 years in the company, 30 years in a marriage that you may or not be that excited about, but it ain't bad, but it ain't great, but it ain't bad.
But you don't know any different. I think the knowledge of something else, of another alternative, of a more, using the words in our little theme of meaning, adventure, and awe, you don't find those in a status quo, accepting the 30-year job, the 6 o'clock martini.
Right. Marry the girl down the street because you had 3 choices and she was the best one.
And Walter Cronkite on the TV.
I remember that, yeah. That's the way it is, he used to say.
And I wonder if your history of experience has something to do with it. I'm thinking I was raised in a less than desirable situation.
You've talked about it many times.
So I needed change. So it could have been ingrained in me from 3 years old that something had to be better, and that it just stuck with me for my entire life. Add to that, I live in Southern California, or California itself, which we are known for, that change is acceptable and desirable. Although so many people are chasing this image of success that when they get it, it's never gratifying.
So can I give you the other side of that?
Yeah.
So I come to California seeking to get out of the rut, looking for some excitement, some change, some highs, and I fell into the entertainment industry, and I worked with a lot of famous celebrities as a press agent. Johnny Mathis, Anthony Quinn, all these famous names and stuff. And I was struck by how unhappy so many of them were. Not those two, but so many of the celebrities I knew, because they had everything, and yet it was never enough. Always more, always different marriage, different part, different thing, always unsatisfied, always looking for more. So you can go too far. They want to change every second.
And I think my response to that would be similar to what we've already talked about, and that is achieving things, but they're not the right things for your soul.
Maybe. Yeah.
They are not soul enriching. They are socially acceptable. They're socially admirable, and they fit the culture of this is what you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to look like. But you get there and say, I never did a self-assessment. I never took a look at that. And
many of them are driven. You talk about drive. A lot of people, the famous story somebody told me years ago, the Southerner guy walks up going door to door, and a guy is sitting on his porch somewhere down south, and his dog is slowly moaning. He says, "Why is the dog making that noise?" He said, "Oh, he's sitting on a nail." And he says, "Why doesn't he move?" He said, "Well, it doesn't hurt that bad." We all sit in a nail, and we just sit there because it doesn't hurt that bad. Some people are very motivated to change, and the celebrities I met, not just that they had talent, something there made them obsessed for success at any price. And somehow when they got there, it was never enough for many of them.
Yeah, and it's, I've done executive coaching, and now I'm doing executive business coaching, and now I'm doing executive life coaching. And I am finding people in that same boat that are extraordinarily successful at their job, but there is a sense of which there is a soul calling for them. There's got to be something else, something more meaningful than what I'm doing. And also, with some of them, it's not changing in career, but changing the way they manage their career. Changing the way they work with people, changing the way they work with new ideas, changing the way that they are implementing different strategies. It's a process change that works with many that are not happy or fulfilled, even though they're very successful. And that's all I work with are successful people.
So the assumption is, as you started with, and I think we all believe this, that there are a lot of dull, ordinary people suffering lives of quiet desperation, as the saying goes, right? Whatever author coined that phrase, living lives of quiet desperation. They're not real happy, but they're not unhappy. That was kind of the world I grew up in. And yet when I came to the high-flying world of Southern California and met high-flying people, a lot of them weren't so happy either. They had done everything, but it was never enough. So is there a sweet spot in the middle here between trying nothing and obsessed with doing everything?
Well, you're jumping forward just a bit, because I'm going to talk about a process of change, and I'm going to suggest a handful of things. I'd like to continue rehearsing the restraints to change, because there's a couple of others I think are very much in line with what you have said. They're very much in line with what you have said. And we've talked about fear of the unknown, the fear of possibility things could go wrong, fear of failure, because now...
Number one, yeah, right.
Now we're talking my identity. If I fail in my advancement pursuit, my meaning pursuit, my career pursuit, I didn't just fail as in a pursuit, my whole persona failed. Who I am, my very essence is a failure, and that's impossible to live with, and so we have to readjust that kind of thinking. A couple of other things, and you talk about rut in the road. Mm-hmm. We get stuck. we just get stuck with things are just okay. They're good, but they're not horrible, except little excitement, little adventure, little awe. We get stuck with that, and we are ready to settle. And I think that is the one thing that we're talking a lot about, is not being ready to settle. I have been, I don't know if it's blessed or cursed, that I cannot settle. When, you know how many careers I've had.
Oh, multiple.
Think once I lasted more than a decade at doing something. But there's always something different I want to experiment with. Always something I feel in my core that I need to take a look at, so it keeps me from being stuck. And it keeps me from being what I wrote here, Paul, and I think it talks about your Midwest friends. It's comfortable but not vibrant.
That's it.
And so, if that is okay with you, if you are fine with that, then this show probably isn't your show. It's probably not the kind of information that really serves you best, because if being comfortable but not vibrant, but the comfortability is so good, then keep doing that, for crying out loud. Don't change. If it's working for you, don't change. But you've got to be sure it's working for you. And then the final restraint, and this is a big one, especially, you see it with single moms, but with it's true with everyone, and that's obligations. I've got this career, I've got these things that I'm doing, that I have to provide for my family, I have to provide for my children, and single moms have no aid in the economics of their family, so it's up to them to be everything, and that is very difficult. And that's where was just this weekend speaking with a single mom who crazily took some of my advice and things, and it was I hate to say advice because I don't like giving advice. I offer suggestions or alternatives. She's very thrilled with the alternatives, although they have not turned out as she dreamed, but she said she realizes that she needs patience and that they will turn out in time. But she has made some internal change or some external changes of finding a house and preparing the house, and she's working right now on building her garden. When she does that, that's going to take her to the next step. Our restraints get in the way of change. Now, what I want to do is the meat of this talk here that we're doing. I'm going to talk about a process for change, but before we do, let's take a quick break, and we'll come right back. Hi there, you're listening to Charlie Hedges in the Next Chapter with Charlie, and we are doing today a solo-sode on everyone has a next chapter, and that every day in your life is a new chapter. Every day is an opportunity for something exciting or explosive or even similar to what you've been doing, but it is personally very gratifying. And we are talking about what it takes to get to that point where you can live a life that is the life you dreamed about. And we've discussed some of the drivers, some of the needs. We've discussed some of the restraints. Now I'd like to spend the rest of our time talking about processes. And this is a matter, I believe it comes to a matter of understanding your core self to the degree that you can do that you analyze what really is important in your life. I have some ideas some things you can do. One of them is, Terry and I talked about it, and I wish I could offer this assessment. I don't know how to offer this assessment. I have a life coach. I always have a life coach. People who do coaching, I think, if they don't have a coach themselves, so they can experience what this process is all about. But I have a life coach, and she turned me on to this character traits assessment. And there's 24 character traits, and you come up with your top 5, your influential 5, and then your medium 5. My top 5, when I received from this VIA character trait assessment, and I think you can go online and take it for free. It's VIA character traits. I think it's free. I'll put it in the show notes if it is, for sure. These core traits, I came out my top 5. Paul, I have never had an assessment tool that I felt nailed me this strongly and identified my core character traits that when I live by these, I am happy, I am most fulfilled, I am most productive, and I'm on all, well, I used to say 8 cylinders. I guess we have to say all 6 cylinders these days.
Right.
But my 5, I'm almost embarrassed, but I want the audience to know what drives me, and that is, my first character trait that drives me is love. And it is love in the big terms. It is love, not so much romantic love between a man and a woman, but love of people, love of life, love of the divine. And since in my paradigm, we are created by a God of love that wants us to experience and give love. So love was number 1. Then, since in my paradigm I just spoke of God, spirituality is 2, that I must be connected with the spiritual part of myself. And then the next 3 are very action-oriented: creativity, love of learning, and curiosity. So when my life has love, spirituality, creativity, love of learning, and curiosity, I'm going to tell you, Paul, I'm a happy camper. I'm a very happy camper. That explains my penchant for travel. Love of learning and curiosity. I'm curious what life is like in other cultures. And when in that curiosity, that feeds my idea of living. For instance, just in a restaurant. You know what is so wonderful in Europe when you go to, because I'm a Europhile. I travel other places, but I always end up going back to Europe, as I will this June, and I'll be back there for nearly a month in Portugal, writing and just experiencing the culture. But a minor thing that in Europe that is so different in the United States, and that is dining at a restaurant. When you're dining at a restaurant in the United States, they're trying to turn tables. And so they're trying to rush you out. They've got, before you're finished with the meal, before you've completed the meal, many times your bill is on the table. They're ready to turn that table and put somebody else so they can turn $1 and get another tip. In Europe, when you go take a table, that table is yours for the night. You stay there as long as you want. They don't care. I recall I was writing in an outdoor terrace in Portugal. It had a view of the river and of the city, and it was quite beautiful. And I was sitting in the shade, and all I was doing was drinking espresso and sparkling water. And after about an hour or two, I kind of felt guilty. So the American in me had me get up and go to the hostess. And we're stupid with tips. They don't tip like we do in the United States. So I gave her a $20 bill and said, I'm just, I feel like I'm taking your table and keeping you from having clients at your table. And she looked at me and she said, what are you talking about? You're being silly. That is your table until you leave. Don't give me any money. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter if you spend money or don't. You got that seat. That seat is yours until you leave, until you feel like leaving. So be comfortable. write in your journal or whatever you're writing on. And it was such a nice cultural change to think of the relaxed atmosphere, and it's much more relaxed, less stressful, less chaotic not in the big cities, but when you start moving into the outsides of the cities, how pleasant it is. But that is what my love of learning and curiosity have taught me, and it's led to continually creating this life of meaning, adventure, and awe. And one of the things that we don't get to that I haven't even spoken of, and that is awe. When I travel, I am in love. I love cities. I love the countries, but I love cities. You know what I love most in cities, Paul?
I don't.
Buildings.
Yeah, that's right. Last time you came back and you were showing me all these pictures, I said, Charlie, those are all buildings.
I love architecture. I love architecture, old, new, and I just have this great sense of awe when I go through and see this new architecture, and I think we need to continue to pursue that. Now, as we're coming, because this is not a long show, although it's longer than I thought it was going to be, there's a couple more elements that I want to bring up. In the 1990s, unfortunately, I was 10 to 15 years ahead of my time, and I wrote a book titled Getting the Right Things Right, Personal Strategies for Reinventing a Life You Want. It was a good book. The concept of reinventing your life was not popular yet. That was the first time anybody was talking about reinventing your life. As a matter of fact, I had somebody that was a major promoter of the book said, I'm not sure that that's even a topic people are interested in. And, today, that's all we talk about is reinventing your life. Therefore, but it still sold about 25,000 copies, but it wasn't a bestseller, but it did okay. But in that, what I did in that is really helpful, and I use this with one of my coachees. I've done this, and I called it the 4 Ps, that we organize our life by the 4 Ps: passion, purpose, people, and praise. Or that praise could be power, whatever the internal, external power is going on in your life. But what I do for myself, and I do this annually or semi-annually, I will go through and say, what do I need to be doing on a regular basis that gives me passion? I need to be going to museums. I need to see film. I need to see art. I need to read creatively. It's the whole creative aspect that I have to do. So I'll make my list. And then in purpose, what do I do with my purpose? Well, I'm going to get into that a little bit when I talk about noble aims. But my purpose of what things do I need to do regularly that give me a sense that I am accomplishing a purpose according to the way that I am created. I will talk about those in a bit. The third one is vital, and that is people. What relationships in your life do you need to nurture on a regular basis? You have replenishing relationships and neutral relationships. Replenishing relationships are those relationships that whenever you meet that person and you walk away from that person, you're feeling better. You're feeling better because you have connected. That's what Terry and I have. We have a very replenishing relationship, except when we're talking politics. And then even then, it's replenishing because we are in the middle of a deep subject. So you want to name those people on this list. Name the people, and then with the 4th P, with praise, that is, how are you nurturing your inner life, your inner core, your inner spiritual self, however you define your spiritual self. There's this core inner part, an unknown. We call it the soul. It's this undefinable, and it's not tangible, yet it certainly is existential. How do you serve that? And then what I do, Paul, You put that on a list, and then I've got monthly checkups. Now, this is what is really cool, is that I do not do daily checkups. I do not do weekly checkups on how I'm doing. Once a month, I will look at my list, and I give myself a plus, check, or minus on how frequently am I doing those things that give me passion. How frequently am I doing the things that I need to be in purpose, and seeing my relationships and nurturing my inner spiritual self. And a plus means just continue working, and I allow check pluses and check minuses. But check minus, anything that gets a check minus and below, there are two things that I need to take a look at. One is that this is an area for me to fulfill the life that I want to fulfill. I need to work on that area. Or two, it was a bad selection. It was a bad choice. Just because I put it on in 1 month doesn't mean it's important the next month. I allow change in that. And I'm telling you, that simple process of going through monthly has been life-changing for me. I use that check plus minus system of evaluating my life on a regular basis. I do it with the 4 Ps. I have my own personal 10 commandments that are very different than the 10 commandments, but they're my personal value system. Am I living to my personal value system? I even have one for my wife of how I treat my wife. What is good for me to treat my wife, and do I feel I am treating my wife well? And we have regular check-ins to see how that is going. Do you know what that simple process has done for my life? Can you imagine if you're checking on your activities and your values monthly, and then making changes to, or making alterations to that? Do you know how that impacts you?
Sounds like it, yeah.
It is absolutely huge. And by the way, I just found out, somebody told me that although it was printed in 1995, that Getting the Right Things Right is still on Amazon.
Wow.
So you could find this. I'll check it out and make sure there's still copies left, and if it is, I'll put it in the show notes. Getting the Right Things Right: Personal Strategies for Reinventing the Life You Want. Now, my final area for process, we've talked about core values. You see, I use a lot of assessments, and I use a lot of outside data and people to help validate and help me understand where I'm going. And this Noble Aims came, I don't even know if you remember the podcast. It was a podcast.
I remember the title. I don't remember the exact specifics. I don't know why that struck me, the title. Yeah. Yeah,
we did one on Noble Aims, and I started off with 4 Noble Aims, and my Noble Aims all hit my pretty much, well, not all, but they're similar to the 4 Ps. They're similar to the purpose, and that my Noble Aims, I have 6 that I think are too many. The question they are addressing is, what do I want to do with my time? How do I want to invest the time I have? And at 72, I used to think I was old. Now I'm no longer thinking I'm old at 72, that I'm giving myself till 80 before I think I'm old. But that I have plenty of time to do whatever I want to do. And my 6 Noble Aims are: first is my family. And that's my immediate family. Now, my extended family certainly counts, but my wife, my son, and my daughter-in-law, and Maggie. I question it. Megs, I'm not questioning it because I'm questioning you. I'm questioning it because I don't like the title. Because I love you, I don't love the title. But what is my relationship like with Pam, with Austin, with Maggie? And that is absolutely critical. My spiritual life, for me, is spiritual is number 2. If I am not investing time in my spiritual life, I'm a worthless human being. Not in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of myself. I need to be connected with the divine and with the love of the divine in order for me to live a meaningful life. So the one after that is what we're doing right now, and that's the next chapter. I have a weekly podcast and a weekly blog. I pour in at least 1 full day, if not 2 full days a week into writing. Well, probably averages out to about 1 full day a week into doing the podcast and to writing a blog. That is very important. And the fourth one is Wells of Life, which we just talked about last week with Nick Jordan, and my pursuit of providing 1 to 2 million people with access to clean water. That takes up a bunch of my time. That was how many? That was
3 or 4. I wasn't counting them. Yeah.
4. It seems like there's one more, but the other one is one more in addition to the last one. But the last one is writing, and I am in the process right now of outlining, putting notes together on a book. It's a book on the history of love. And
the history of love. Is there a history to love?
Yeah, there is. It's called the Bible.
Okay.
And most people don't look at the Bible as a history of love. They look at it as a history of law.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. The 10 Commandments, right.
Yeah, and then you come to the 10 Commandments of Jesus in the New Testament, which are the Beatitudes, and there's 8 of them. Those, for me, are the 10 Commandments of the Beatitude, are 10 Commandments of the New Testament: mourning, poverty, meekness, kindness, peacemakers, pursuit of righteousness. Those are the 10 Commandments. Those are commandments of love. Even in the Old Testament, which seems like we've got a general, a pissed off general patent for a God, we do not have. We have a God who is starving for love. All of the misadventures of the nation Israel are a result of the failure to love God and God's hunger, overwhelming desire to be loved. In our Episcopal liturgy for the Eucharist, the very first words is, Gracious Father, eternal God, in your infinite wisdom, you made us for yourself. And then it goes on, and then when we had fallen into sin and become subject to evil and death, you in your mercy sent Jesus Christ, which is significantly important, but I like that first clause. I think, have I talked about this on the podcast already? I feel like I have.
Not in depth. I think you've mentioned it. Yeah.
But creation was made because God wanted to experience love. God wanted another avenue to give love and to receive love, and that's why we are creatures of free will, because God did not create robots that would love him automatically, but that would choose to love him out of his goodness and out of his love. That is the essence of the book of love, and so a history of love. So there will be a lot, and also be a lot of mystical teachings from the late medieval Christian mystics that lived in this area and did not live in the area of dogma and rules and regulations.
And thou shalt not. That's the Bible. Thou shalt not.
Isn't that, Paul, that's so disappointing to me, and yet it's so true. It's disappointing not that you said it, but that you're echoing the way the majority of people view that part of the scripture. And St. Paul in the New Testament is not so much easier. He has a lot of thou shalt nots. But what they really are is the law. Now I'm getting off into a spiritual tangent, or a biblical tangent, but I think it's applicable. Laws are not something you do to gain God's love. Laws are something they're evidence. It's like fruit of the Spirit. It is evidence that you are in love with God, and that you follow these because they're lined up with the will of God, the love of God, and the desire of God for creation. There is nothing you can do to earn that love. That love has been all taken care of. Now I'd have to go through a whole theology, but that love is all taken care of through Jesus Christ. But there's an in-depth theology.
Well, I would love it if you would, on a future episode, talk more about this history of love, this different look at love. Because I think you and I were talking before the show, I'll end with this, that we grew up in the summer of love. You know, it was all about peace and love. You went to protests and they didn't throw rocks. They put flowers in people's hair. There was a vibe in the air, whether it was true or fake or didn't carry out. I mean, it didn't last. But there was an aspiration for love. Now we seem to live in the age of hate and fear around the world. You know, anger, war, attack, cancel, get rid of, hate you, everything. I don't know that we come at it, our first impulse is love anymore. I think it's fear, attack.
It's fear. That's what's running the world today, and we're seeing and we're reaping the fruits of fear. It started, you know, I think it probably started with...
It started with change. When things changed, when everything was the same, we liked it. When things changed, the world changed, our place in the world changed, our economic world changed. I grew up in the Midwest, everything changed. Towns disappeared, factories went away, immigrants appeared. You know, it doesn't look and feel like the world I grew up in, which was very unchanged, very same, very vanilla.
Yeah, it's you know, we want to I've heard we want to go back to normal, and when we take a look at what normal wasn't all that good.
No,
all it was made out to be.
It was normal if you were part of the mainstream, if you were part of the if you liked vanilla, but if you wanted flavor, if you wanted difference, it was not a very flavorful or different existence.
So let me wrap up with this. Let me close by encouraging our listeners. I hope this was helpful. I hope there were pieces that were thought-provoking for you and lead you to live a life, to pursue a life of passion and meaning, adventure, awe, that is all consistent with who you are, not consistent with what somebody else has you to be. That there are so many resources out there to help you. Well, almost too many resources. There's too many books. But search and you can find the right books. The abandonment of fear and the acceptance of a whole proposition of action to make changes, not as much in the world, but changes in ourself, in our personal self. How can I do the right things right that are right for me, and I would add, and serve the world? With that, we're going to close it, Paul, and let everybody know, as we always do, this is Charlie Hedges with The Next Chapter with Charlie, signing off. Bye for now, and until next.